Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to what is becoming the final leg of our presentations that are part of the regional plan snapshots. Today, we are discussing climate change and energy from the standpoint of resilience. This is the second in a series. And today with us are Jenna Ortega, who is the City of Flagstaff's Climate Engagement Specialist, and Amanda Atkinson, who is the Sustainability Manager for Coconino County, and they will be co-presenting this exciting topic. Again, Regional Snapshots is an ongoing series. I think this is our official 18th snapshot. They are held on Mondays at noon. We are skipping Monday the 28th. We don't have a webinar for that date, but we will have one on April 4th to discuss water and sewer utilities. And what that looks like in our region. We always remind you too that everything in these presentations is a draft, and that after the presentation, there will be 15 minutes for questions and answers. And then we will post that recorded content on the City of Flagstaff's YouTube page, so it can be used as a reference for the entire regional plan update process. And with that, I'm going to mute myself and hand it over to Jenna.
Thank you, Sarah. So yeah, today we are on the 201 section. On the left, you'll see 2 weeks ago's presentation that really focused on mitigation. And on the right side is kind of our brief agenda for the day. So I'm going to start us off with just a few definitions and kind of talk about what resilience is. And then we're going to talk about the vulnerabilities in our region and talk about equity. And then to wrap us up, we'll kind of talk about what are the plans in our region when we think about resilience. And finally, what more to be curious about. Thank you. All right, so to start us off here, these are the 3 types of climate action that we talk about. We often use words such as mitigation, adaptation, and equity. These are kind of longer names, but the actions they refer to are really simple, and that's what you see there in the circles. And these are the 3 ways. So they are to reduce our impact, to prepare for change, and also helping our most vulnerable community members. Next slide. Thank you. So some types of climate action focus on really lowering our greenhouse gas emissions. But adaptation, what we're kind of talking about today, is focused on preparing our communities, our systems, and our resources to be more resilient to climate change impacts. Adaptation involves understanding and addressing the vulnerabilities in our region. It involves large-scale changes, something like infrastructure improvements, but also a lot of small-scale changes like family preparedness and strengthening our neighborhood connections. Next slide. And now to kind of talk about what resilience means. And when we are talking about in the context of climate, we define resilience as the ability to anticipate, accommodate, and thrive amidst the pressures of climate change by improving quality of life, our systems, economic vitality, and the conservation of resources. Change is always the one thing I think we all know we can count on happening. And when it comes to the impacts of climate change, how we meet the challenges, how we cope with them, how we learn from them, and whether or not we thrive in the face of them depends to a great extent on how resilient we are. Next slide. And so to kind of talk about what's happening in Flagstaff and Coconino County and in our greater region, these are some of the things that compared to today, by 2050, we expect to have on average hotter temperatures, which I think, you know, that one we are definitely noticing. Lower snowpack as well. And this really focuses on our overnight temperatures not being as cold. and also increased wildfire risk and less healthy forest and more severe drought. So these are really going to impact us. And I am going to pass it over to Amanda.
Thanks, Jenna. So very excited to be here in partnership with the city and talking about climate change and the impacts to our communities and the vulnerabilities. So Jenna started highlighting some of the impacts to our tourism, our water, our land use, housing, and our health. And in the next several slides, we'll go into detail about that. So the city of Flagstaff did develop a climate action and adaptation plan with consultants, and this information comes from that data. So I did want to highlight that there's data to back up some of this or much of this information that we're presenting, and today is just a high level, but we have the resources to go back to it. Next slide, please. So vulnerabilities in tourism and recreation. As you can see, snow is a high vulnerability, and tourism is our #1 economic driver, both in the city of Flagstaff and Coconino County. Coconino County, we have over 6 million tourists who come through our community, and that's for snow play to summer play. And with private partners and community members, how do we continue to grow in these diverse recreational opportunities, but still adapt to our changing environments? And so winter tourism is something that we're going to be working more and more on locally as the climate changes. And then safety as well. So as community members are coming in to our community, ensuring the safety of members as they're in the forest and potential threats in that area. Next slide. So vulnerabilities in our water supply, quality, and infrastructure. This has already been a challenge in our community. We experienced it with the Schultz fire, and the city of Flagstaff's main water supply and much of Coconino County as well comes through our watersheds. And so protecting our watersheds from fire and then flooding is a major effort and concern of our community. And when we have these fires, it's not only devastation to the infrastructure itself, but it's the after effects of it and the debris going into our water systems as well. So it's not even just the immediate impact, it's the ongoing impacts as well. Next slide. Next slide, please, Sarah. Forest health. This is, so Coconino County and the city of Flagstaff, we are home to the largest continuous ponderosa pine forest in the world. And with that comes the responsibility and, again, tourism opportunities. And protecting our forest health, it not only helps with the safety of our communities, but it helps to sequester carbon as well. And a lot of folks don't realize that we can sequester through healthy soils and not only healthy trees. And so it is looking at our forest as an ecosystem and not just individual trees or individual species. And working as we're going in and protecting through wildfire, how can we also use that product to benefit our community and to also ensure that there's flooding protection and forest thinning of diseased and dead forest areas. And so vulnerabilities in our forest are high, and this is a large focus for us. And we are seeing, unfortunately, impacts, again, not just the fires and the floods, but with insurance, and local community members are now facing potential issues with insuring their homes in areas because of these threats. And so by mitigating it, we help to ensure the economic vitality of our communities as well. Next slide. Land use, infrastructure, and housing in relation to climate change and impacts. And so open space, land use, infrastructure, residential energy. These are related in that, again, if we have open space that allows for healthy ecosystems to help provide those natural assets to our communities, from absorption to safe areas. When we're looking at land use, as population grows, we're looking at more and more areas that are going into the forested areas. And so how do we plan and protect, knowing that as population grows, we're going into our forest, how do we mitigate against those vulnerabilities? And I'll talk about those in some upcoming slides. One of that is helping with our infrastructures. So right here is the aqua park for the city of Flagstaff, Aquaplex. And they have been working really hard in increasing ventilation in community centers. And so that it creates a safe space for people to go and either cool off or have healthy air. And so working to create these infrastructure safety places in our community is another way that we can serve our residents. And then residential energy use is very much at risk with climate change. Not only the supply of it, from natural disasters, knocking down poles and infrastructure with that, or infrastructure falling and starting forest fires, as well as some of the areas of the regional area plan in Coconino County, their water supply, actually with all of these areas, water supply is connected to energy. And so when one goes, then we have to have emergency services in place to provide for the other. And so it's thinking holistically as we prepare and adapt to the change. Next slide, please. Vulnerabilities in public health, safety, and services. As natural disasters and the impacts of climate change increase, so does the demand on our services, public health and safety, as well as health and human services. The trauma of natural disasters and the anxiety that comes with the uncertainty has a major impact on mental health. And there's several studies that discuss that. Heat-related illnesses, whether it's asthma to sensitivities to increased heat, all these have an impact on our communities. And unfortunately, it is our most vulnerable communities that are at risk. So those who are elderly, who have limited resources, who aren't able to move around easy. So those are things that we have to, as a community, consider as we move forward as well. Next slide, please. So that brings us to equity. And this is at the core of sustainability and climate action, and that we can't achieve without all of us being stronger as a whole. And as I mentioned earlier, are most vulnerable are those that are at the greatest risk. And so how we work to protect the youth, the elderly, and be inclusive in our planning is a key piece. And so just like the picture here, everybody is different and we're all diverse. And so are our communities. There's not one community or neighborhood that looks exactly the same. And so as our cities and county, or the city and the county are working with our communities and neighborhoods, it's also working on the natural assets and strengths within those communities and building on those as well. And again, adapting to the diversity of the needs in those neighborhoods. Next slide. And now I'll pass it to Jenna.
Thanks, Amanda. So far, we've talked about the hazards, risk, vulnerability assessment. So really, we understand the challenges and changes our region is facing. But what do we do next? So this is where we talk about preparing, planning, and acting. So opportunities or efforts to increase the region's resiliency to climate change will happen through preparing for system changes and disruption. When it comes to this, you can think about access to resources such as food or access to services such as transportation. We need to continue identifying and addressing gaps in human, natural, and built infrastructure and resources. We really need to start acting to improve our region's ability to adapt to the future and to strengthen our community systems. We also have to help, as Amanda was talking about, our community members become more resilient. It's not always just the natural environment when we think about resiliency. Community resilience really helps neighborhoods be able to bounce forward and use challenges to help us actually become stronger as a result. These programs could help you get to know your neighbors better when it comes to thinking about who needs help in an emergency situation. Or it could be initiatives that help businesses adapt to changes in our seasons or economy. So at the City of Flagstaff, we have, a handful of projects that we're working on. These include a Resilient Neighborhoods project that has still been trying to take off from the ground during these difficult last few years we've all faced. And this is really to encourage neighborhoods to be more connected and more resilient through projects and events. We have the Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project, and this is an example of citywide resilience planning when it comes to the care of the forests surrounding Flagstaff and protecting critical watersheds in those forests. Thinking about fire-wise communities, stormwater infrastructure, backup generators at water treatment plants, and education is such a big part of this. So many different climate education programs, as well as distributing HEPA filters to vulnerable community members when our air is not healthy. And hopefully many more coming. We can go to the next slide. One thing before I pass it back to Amanda, I wanted to quickly touch on that there was also an amendment to the Flagstaff Regional Plan to align with the City of Flagstaff's climate action goals. So as most of you know, the climate action work in the city has really taken off since 2014 during the adoption of the regional plan. And that created a gap in the guidance that was provided in the regional plan versus the city's climate goals. So this amendment was really just to align the regional plan with the city's climate goals. And this does have several benefits to really not just restore that alignment and clarify the type of climate action to take, but also to increase transparency and reduce confusion, and most importantly, provide decision makers with support when it comes to climate action. So the slide has a lot of text, but it shows a couple of the updates. There was revisions to a couple goals and an additional four policies that you can all find online. So Next slide, and I think back to Amanda.
Thank you, Jenna. So we wanted to end, we have one more slide after this, but talking about strengthening our communities. As Jenna pointed out, it's not only the resilience and adaptation of our natural environment, but it's also our social environments, our communities, our economic systems. And so for Coconino County, there's several things that we're working on. We have a forest restoration initiative and forest restoration director that has been working very hard in thinning the forest around Coconino County, helping to make our neighborhoods safer. And in that process, helping to protect watersheds. Our in community development, our planning staff and our sustainable building staff, along with others, work with individuals and neighborhoods as they're developing area plans to subdivisions to new businesses or homes on how to incorporate fire-wise, how to incorporate resilience and adaptation to the changing climates. So in Coconino County, I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. We are the size of Switzerland geographically. And so we have 5 different climate zones, and for us, the area, the regional area plan, our communities still look different than some of the areas of Flagstaff. And so being adaptive in our adaptive approaches is very key for us. And working in partnerships with the city of Flagstaff and other cities within Coconino County and the Forest Service and others is key. And then building on those community-based natural assets, whether it's those trained in forest thinning to help train other community partners on how to thin their properties. So it's empowerment, as well as, like Jenna pointed out, helping to create those connections within our neighborhoods, so that community members can look to one another as well for support and resources, and know where to go for that information. And so as Jenna pointed out, there's a lot of information on their website as well as ours. Just a quick plug, we just started a sustainability website. Please visit it on Coconino County Community Development. You'll see a lot of Firewise information on there. And lastly, diversity, equity, and inclusion is key, as we were talking about, as we work to be resilient and adaptive and support that in our communities. Next slide. So these are things to be curious about, some talking points that Jen and I thought would be great things to consider, whether we talk about it now or just to go home with. But how can our communities be prepared and resilient to changes as a result of climate change? So yeah, how can you all be a part of that, and what would that look like for you? How can we ensure that we are creating a stronger region that is well prepared to adapt in a volatile future? So not leaving anyone behind, adapting as a region. We don't live in separate ecosystems, so we're going to be more successful as a whole. How will we ensure equity is integrated into each action we take? So Jen and I touched on that, but love to hear additional feedback and ideas. What is the difference in the roles of federal, state, county, and local jurisdictions? How can we work effectively across multiple landowners? And how can we balance rural and urban development needs? And with that, I'd like to pass it back to Sarah and go for questions.
Thank you. I think that there are lots of opportunities for questions, and we have many people here who haven't been to a previous webinar with the city. So thank you so much for coming. And to ask questions, you can either put your question in the chat, put that you have a question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. And you can be on or off camera when you ask your question. So this is the Q&A part. And I see Nat White has a question. Do you go ahead?
Thank you. I'll be quick. 3 comments. One, the fire service has already noticed an increased use of fires during the summertime, and they may have some statistics, and that use is both good, responsible use and bad use. So that's something to be aware of. Second, it's my guess that there is a population migration from the valley to Prescott and then eventually to Flagstaff as the winters get more mild. But that migration may not be the folks that need affordable housing, but the middle to higher income folks. And so what is the plan as far as servicing that need? As you know, if a need isn't served, then the prices for what's remaining go way up. So it just seems to me that there's some resiliency planning in terms of housing and growth. And part of that, what can we do and what does the community want? And then the last thing I was going to say, the city and the county seem to be working very well together on all of this resiliency thing. But is the state and the feds working with you at the same time? And are the ranchers around here, which play a significant part in land use, part of this, really integrated into this whole thing and not just, oh, they're out there? So those are my 3 comments. Thanks. Thanks for doing this too.
So part of that, I mean, there's actually a lot of interest at the federal level at the Housing and Urban Development Department to discuss resiliency and disaster resiliency and climate change impacts on housing and migration. I'm going to a presentation this afternoon on changes to migration patterns. And I think that's a close area to watch because the migration patterns of the last 10 years may not be great predictors of the migration patterns we see in the next 15 to 20 years. There's a very good chance it will be different. And so I think that's one of those macro trends that as we're working on the regional plan, we will have to consider carefully and keep an eye on and stay up to date on the information. We certainly saw that during the pandemic and the year preceding it, there was an increased number of people who used to reside in Maricopa County who migrated to Coconino County. And so, the majority of our population growth for the last 20 years has been migration and not the rate of natural increase. But I think that's become even more concentrated, where maybe 10 years ago, I would have speculated it was happening from several regions into Flagstaff, is a south to north migration that's getting more, becoming a stronger factor and more correlated to specific locations that are seeing heat impacts. And so even though we are, maybe talking about heat refuges here, how our surrounding communities in Arizona are adapting to heat and heat emergencies, which is something we will definitely see in the next 20 years, will have a big impact on what we see in Coconino County and Flagstaff. Amanda and Jenna, would you add anything to that and maybe talk about the ranchers in our rural landscape?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Nat, for the awesome questions. And so, yeah, with our ranchers in Coconino County, like you said, Nat, huge opportunity, and we're very fortunate that with the Diablo Trust and their conservation planning, that they've already laid a great foundation to build from, and they've been very involved with Melissa Shaw's work on the renewable energy ordinance as well. because a lot of renewable energy developers are also looking at ranch lands as opportunities. And so it does allow for us to have that conversation of climate change and its impacts. I do think there is greater opportunity, and I'm excited by the continued conversations with our ranching community partners. And them being a large landowner, private landowner in Coconino County. Yeah, there's a lot of great work already being done, and then there's a lot of opportunity there as well.
Yeah, and I think Amanda's more suited to cover that topic. And, you know, when it comes to affordable housing, you're absolutely correct. And I think as a city, we are working hard. You know, I think we realize that there's a bunch of challenges we face that are interconnected. And one of those is climate change and housing. And so we are trying to work, you know, within our whole city government to come together, whether it's bringing our commissions together, you know, working jointly on different projects. So it's definitely an area that we are aware of, and we don't have the perfect solution, but we are trying to bring together as many people within our organization to work on it because it's such an interconnected issue. And as far as federal and state, Sarah kind of touched on this, but there's great opportunities right now, especially as more funding comes through to partner on a lot of these things. So there's not a lot of huge projects that, you know, we have been working on for years, but I think there's a lot of opportunities coming up that we would love to partner with state or federal agencies working on the same issues.
And I'd just like to add on that. Thanks, Jenna. Yeah, same with the federal and state partners working together. There's been some partnerships, but definitely a lot of room for opportunities there. But with affordable housing, I think so. We have a community member here who's a great, who's on this presentation, who's a great model of creating community land trust programs. And so I think for us, it's helping to empower community members to create land trust to help ensure affordability, or working with affordable housing organizations, whether it be Northern Arizona Housing Solutions to Habitat for Humanity and others like that. Because they have different limitations and different opportunities than we do as a city in Coconino County. We have limited regulations that we could put in place, but with those organizations, they're able to ensure that their projects are left for affordable or workforce housing. And so I think partnerships.
And then we have a couple of questions queued up right now. So Sat and then Tyler and then Nina had a question in the chat, but we're going to go in that order. So Sat, what is your question?
Well, I think, I guess my big question is, are we comprehensively looking at growth? Phoenix is growing like topsy. I was just down there, went by a construction project that had, no kidding, 13 cranes on it. Must be one of these huge battery or electric vehicle plants. Unbelievable. It is unbelievable that Phoenix is growing like that, given its climate challenges, but there it is. Folks are coming our way. And we've got to, I think we've made progress. We are not letting commercial interests define growth as progress anymore. I think we see that growth could be progress, but not necessarily. And we've done some things like the 180 project where we've really knuckled down and made tough decisions and made a difference. And there are lots of areas where we need to say, anticipate growth, look at the values in the comprehensive and regional plans and say, how's that going to impact it? And what are the hard decisions we have to make? You can just say no in certain areas. And I think we need to do that. We did it on Highway 180. To me, that was a watershed. When I hear carbon neutrality by 2030, that really sounds like pie in the sky. That's 8 years from now. Two things that might help us get there, and I know that we're working on these because I'm not going to miss the heat pump seminar on the 31st. But to have any chance of getting close to that, we need to go electric. I don't think there's any question about that. So New York City's turned off the gas to new construction. They're not much colder than we are. Heat pumps are not in our building culture here, but they are very available. They're all over New England, colder than us, Europe, colder than us, but it's hard to get them here. And so we're trying to educate both consumers and the construction community, but anything that we can do to electrify is a good thing. I was just looking at my construction magazines, which are more focused on New England than here. You can get these sweet little units that are heat pumps, and they have air filtration, bringing in outside air and filtering it at a level that would make life livable if we become like California and are blown away by the smoke in the summer. So that's one electrification element. And the other is toilet to tap. I think we have a better way of saying that. Do we call it adaptive reuse or something? But and I've read that in the paper lately. We're having that discussion. There's no question that we've got to go that way. The energy involved in using Red Gap Ranch and pumping water 25 miles or whatever it is, that's just not a possibility if we're serious about our carbon neutrality goals. And the third thing that's going to help us a lot is electric vehicles. We don't seem to be really taking that into account in our transportation and carbon neutrality plans, but I think it's happening. And obviously it's not something we control. But when the Chevy Silverado and the Ford F-150 are going electric, as well as Tesla and everybody else, it could be that in 8 or 10 years, a pretty good proportion of the cars are going to be electric. That's going to help a lot. So I guess that's the big picture, is anticipating growth and trying to get real with our 2030 plan, sitting down and making hard decisions. But I think it's, from what I hear and what I read in the paper and what I see City Council looking at, I think we're headed in a good direction, really. Thanks.
I think that's really important to talk about growth. I know we had a session on growth and described its characteristics and how we measure it earlier in this series of snapshots. And we're working on getting a paper out that describes it a little more. And there's going to be some things about climate and how that could be impacting our migration patterns in that paper that we are currently working on. And the reason is that we do have to be realistic about it. I think we've come sometimes to that hard decision and said, like in the last regional plan, I can tell you that the regional plan population we projected was a little less. It was on the low projection that came from the state. They actually would have predicted our growth in that time frame a little higher if we'd have chosen the mid-range projection. And so, I think part of resiliency and preparedness is not just to pick our desired outcome, but to think about worst case scenarios and scenarios that don't fit our ideal and how we will still stay together as a community and work together as times along those lines come before us. I think that inextricably this idea of resiliency and growth management are tied together in that way. And it makes those conversations, the regional plan being a nice, safe place to have those conversations, because it all still feels theoretical, but the decisions we make underneath that under 10 years will make a difference on whether or not we're on a path that achieves a resilient future, or one that we have a major disruption at some point that really hurts our community.
You know, one thing, we've been talking about housing, and we're in a real pickle, I think, with housing, and this relates somewhat to energy and resiliency, because our housing is being commercialized in a way on a couple of levels that we don't have a handle on at all. One of those levels is vacation rentals. And I can tell you, I manage a vacation rental for a family member who lives out of town, and it's sweet. And he's making a ton of money. And there are I've got a management company. I don't go there anymore. This company takes total care of it. I mean, it's so attractive to pick up a house. You use it yourself a little bit, you vacation rental, you make money, but it pulls it out of the rental market. And now we're seeing companies come in and buy houses just for rentals. And so we're seeing the whole system monetized in a way that we have no control over and are way behind on even thinking about. And that's a tough one. And again, we've got to look at growth hard and really think about the tough decisions that have to be made. You know, they are talking about allowing local communities to have more control over vacation rentals at the state legislature, which has been a big problem. We put together a pretty good ordinance in the county, not addressing all of these issues, but addressing some of them. And as soon as we got it passed, and we worked really hard on it, the state legislature nixed it, took away the ability of local communities to control things. But we've just got to sit down. Maybe we should have a growth commission, sit down, make hard decisions, because if we're not out in front and we're just reacting, we're at a much weaker situation than if we have looked ahead. And that's, of course, the whole idea of the regional plan and the comprehensive plan, is to do that work. Thanks.
Tyler, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? And I know we still have one in the chat.
Yes, first, just check, can you hear me okay? Oh, thank you. I'm curious if there will be any discussion, specific discussion of land use policies in the regional plan with regards to climate resiliency. And there are actually two specific points I'm curious if it's going to discuss. The first one, any discussion in directing growth towards the urban core instead of pushing out into the urban wildland interface to reduce fire risk. And two, will there be any discussion of legalizing dense walkable neighborhoods to reduce dependence on fossil fuels, which are likely to increase in costs due to climate-related supply chain disruptions, and also new taxes that price in the impact of greenhouse gas emissions into fossil fuels?
I think the answer to that question is it depends, because it depends on what this public process brings us to as a community in terms of consensus. I think those will both be topics that are discussed both in the scenario planning workshops that we plan to do within the next year and a half-ish, as well as the collaborative process that will go underway. At this point, we're just sharing information. We do have some policies that say we should grow in, and our modeling that we did in 2014 certainly told us that not only should Flagstaff grow in, but it should grow in faster than I think a lot of people were comfortable with. And I think that's part of why the policies got mitigated that would have supported that more centralized grow in approach, because people were worried about what the outcomes of that look like. We certainly wrestled with those questions over the last few years. And I anticipate the topic's going to come up again, and probably we'll see some similar things in scenario planning that talk about the fact that growing in may be a very essential strategy, and when we have to figure out what does it take to be comfortable with growing in as a community. Now, in terms of the second question of what about walkable neighborhoods, the regional plan, at least for the city, as a general plan, we are supposed to adopt strategies associated with the general plan. The city council at the time that the current plan was adopted chose not to adopt an overarching citywide set of strategies. And they decided that our neighborhood planning efforts would be where those strategies would be generated. That might be the implementation style associated with that is certainly back on the table for discussion and consideration as part of the regional plan update. So I would say both of those totally on the table. I don't have any predetermined answers because it takes a lot of discussion to get from this information sharing phase to having the collaborative decision making that I hope we're able to support through both everyone here's participation and some, a robust process that gives us a lot of information about values and trade-offs. I think so. Nina had a question in the chat, and I don't know if Nina wants to ask it, but she and someone else both asked, and I think this is for Jenna, to describe more about the neighborhood resiliency program.
Thank you, Nina. So this program got a lot of work put into it in the last year and a half or so, or kind of got laid out right during the pandemic. And it's really, the name of it is the Resilient Neighborhood Network, and it's designed to really encourage the Flagstaff community to become more connected and resilient through projects and events. And so what has been done is we have a ton of resources, and this is everything from it's like an 18-page beautiful guidebook on kind of how you can start this in your neighborhood. It has activity ideas, meeting guides, hundreds of resources. It has things like an assessment sheet to work on with your neighbors. And it's this 5-page checklist thinking about everything from if people are growing food in your neighborhood through all sorts of different things. And then even has a planning document. So once you do this assessment that thinks about air quality and water and energy and how far away you are from health services or emergency services, it then has different activities that can help you get there. And these include a lot of partners, like making your neighborhood fire-wise and working with the Flagstaff Fire Department, or, even just a party in your neighborhood to get to know each other and make a list of your guys' phone numbers. So if there is a fire and you realize someone may not have access to transportation to leave when there's a fire, so there's calling lists to make sure everyone's safe. So it's a really neat program. And the idea was we were going to be out in the neighborhood, knocking on every door and talking to people. And that got put on hold, but we are hoping again by hopefully this summer to even have potentially interns help us with this project, because we don't have enough staff for us all to be out there and reaching every community member, but it's something that is a wonderful resource and we are excited to get out there. We just haven't had the capacity to do so in a good manner yet. So I can even put some links in the chat, but there's a ton of resources. And if you have more in-depth questions, you can definitely reach out to me, Nina.
Thank you, Jenna. That sounds fabulous.
I don't see any other questions at this time, so I'm going to stop recording. Thanks everyone for your participation.